Who remembers classic food mascots? Ronald McDonald, Tony Tiger, the Colonel, Uncle Ben. No, not that Uncle Ben. I'm talking about Ben's original.
Are you ready?
Yes, your mind is no doubt racing, thinking back to the days of your youth when you was a tad more impressionable and marketing companies knew it, using the same methods that toy companies do in order to raise your cholesterol, forcing you to become brainwashed into buying merchandise based on food. Yes, food. And as stupid as that sounds, none of this is really new information, especially in the world of video games, where all the major brands have had video games based upon them, creating a weird subgenre of titles that really should have stayed far, far away from your consoles. And hey, look at me! I'm now doing a video about it. I just found a load of food mascots that were popular enough to get their own video game, but of course, we're not going to be covering the obvious today. Today, we'll be chatting about the underbelly flaps of food mascots, the likes that you have never seen before. Welcome to Slope's Game Room, the channel where I upload stupid videos like this pretty much every week, just for you. Make sure you hit subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on future videos, blah blah blah. Let's just get on with the video. Who out there remembers Haribo? Of course you do. It's still around and has become one of the world's greatest manufacturers of fruit gums and licorice, popularising the iconic gummy bear, which again it still mass produces to this very day, pumping out over 100 million of the buggers per day. Yes, per day. Starting its life in Germany back in the 1920s, the company was pretty much an instant success. The owner, Hans Regel's first employee was his wife. They worked together, being able to buy their own home the same year, and since then have constantly expanded operations, as by the time the 60s had rolled around, the company had started international expansions, including the United States, by the time that the 80s had rolled round. As stated, the Gold Bear has pretty much always been the go-to sweet for Haribo, and since then, it's pretty much always been the company's mascot. However, during the 90s and a little later, depending on what part of the world you lived in, going along with the company's new slogan, kids and grown-ups love it so, the happy world of Haribo, it was decided that another mascot was needed. No, not this one, not this one, not this one, not this one, but this one. The one that's almost entirely forgotten. Again, this wasn't here to completely replace the Gold Bear entirely, but again, depending on what part of the world you're in, he was here to work together with Gold Bear, and Haribo really pushed this character called the Harry Boy, and you're not going to find him anywhere, guys. Oh, here he is! I found him! No wonder he's almost non-existent this day. He's the face of the bloody licorice. And yes, make sure to keep watching because I will open up that Haribo mystery bag a little bit later on in the video. To many, this character may be so familiar to you within the world of Haribo that you may be surprised to hear that Haribo have actually been phasing this character out considerably since he was introduced in the 90s. And you know, even though the company does have quite a few other mascots as well for the marshmallows or whatever, back in 1996 they really did push for Harry Boy to be the company's main mascot by giving him his own video game. Harry Boy's Quest. In the game, unsurprisingly, you control Harry Boy, who gets sucked into a picture, finding himself in the magical land of Bonbonia. See what they did there? Your aim is to get the formula for the magic candy, which has been destroyed by an evil dragon. You venture through 250 different screens, and all of the audio is completely voice acted. Voice acted badly, but still, voice acted all the same.
Gold Bear, do you want to help me open this door? It's too heavy for me to do it alone.
I'll do it with pleasure, but first I need some energy. If you could give me a sweet, I'll perhaps be able to open this big door.
It's insane how much effort went into this thing. Now granted, unlike all of the other games, it wasn't a super low budget or even a free giveaway release, but still, the amount of effort gone into here is pretty outstanding, and that needs to be stated. Gold Bear helps you along your way from time to time, doing all of these things that could have easily been done by yourself, and Harry Boy knows it, looking at you all the way through the game constantly with his overly smug grin. But of course, long gameplay doesn't exactly equal grand gameplay. The point and click game is incredibly tiresome, randomly playing itself from time to time as you continuously accidentally click the wrong area, trying to combine objects that make absolutely no sense whatsoever in order to get the recipe to bring Haribo treats to the masses before the pirates steal them. I mean, come on. Was you actually expecting a deeper story in a Haribo game?
No use in staying at home. I know what you should do. Come on over to my place. Hey you, we're having a Wimpy.
Who remembers Wimpy Grills? Originally starting all the way back in 1934 in Bloomington, Indiana, the Popeye-inspired restaurant moderately grew in popularity over the years with 26 locations, primarily in Chicago, where the chain ended up selling a whopping 8 million hamburgers a year in its prime. Ooh, no offense. Yeah, we all know why this one didn't exactly catch on. But did you know the only reason we don't hear of Wimpy anymore in the States is because in 1977, after the owner's death, nobody purchased the rights to the name. However, the practically non-existent American chain found much greater success worldwide when in 1954 the owner sold the license to use the name internationally to Lions & Co., a company that practically any British individual of age would know very, very well, although they are more well known these days as the part owners to Baskin-Robbins and Dunkin' Donuts. Regardless, back in the day, Lions went crazy with Wimpy in the UK. Other companies tried their best to open branches in different parts of the world, some of which still exist in South Africa, Kuwait and Egypt, but it was the UK where the struggling American originated company really did shine.
No way! I can't believe this!
I don't know what it was like for all of you guys, but as a kid, I have fonder memories of going to Wimpy than, say, McDonald's.
What?
In Maidstone High Street, the town near where I grew up, Wimpy was the dominant force in the 80s. McDonald's existed too, of course, and because of that, even though Wimpy had the best location, it was demoted to a smaller establishment, as was Burger King, with a bank now in its place. Still, give me a cold Frankfurter burger filled with pickles, aka a Freddy, any day of the week over a bloody Big Mac, right? Guys? Wimpy for 70s and 80s kids does bring back some rather awesome memories. After all, they had over 500 locations at their prime, and of course it was in direct competition with the King and the Clown, so it too needed its own mascot. And that mascot came in 1978 with the imaginatively titled Mr. Wimpy, a Beefeater looking character. Not to be confused with Mr. Beefeater, who was a specifically designed Mr. Men character for the Beefeater restaurants. Mr. Wimpy had a massive hat that covered up his eyes, yet he can still see you. You can't get away.
Mr. Wimpy's here.
And he bought himself a video game.
Time to eat!
Now guys, I have got to admit something here. As a kid, I thought this game was awesome. You start off by taking the empty tray from the left-hand side of the screen to the right-hand side to get the ingredients, and then you bring it back. It's all pretty basic stuff. However, that's only half of the game. You see, in the next screen, you have this really creative platforming and ladder-filled screen where you have to dodge angry eggs and sausages or whatever, running over the different layers of a burger, dropping them down to create the full meal. It's impressive stuff, right? No, seriously, hear me out. It might not look like much, but there's actually a lot of strategy to this. Trying to capture the bad guys under the buns, setting off chain reactions is all really quite deep and definitely addictive.
That's right, fool!
Unfortunately, this other game, unimaginatively called Burger Time, came out and completely copied the idea, leaving this to become a bit of a forgotten obscurity. Or at least, that was my thought at the time. don't hate me guys, it was the 80s. For me, this game did come first. It was the first game I played like this. Unfortunately for Wimpy the mascot, although not quite as creepy as Ronald McDonald, was still, let's be honest here, a little bit crap. And as the competition continued to slowly take over the Wimpy name, the company that recently purchased Burger King decided to buy out all remaining 381 Wimpy restaurants, turning the vast majority of them into Burger King, leaving barely more than 50 locations around the UK as of 2022. And here's one right here. I took the family to Wimpy, my wife's first ever Wimpy. Honestly, I think it's kind of like an upmarket greasy spoon, but without a doubt it is definitely a shadow of its former self. They didn't even have the Beefeater costume anymore. I asked and it's been gone for at least 10 years. So yeah, sure it may not be what it once was, but it is at least still very memorable. One that I'm sure plenty of 80s kids can relate to. After reading up the history piece on the company from Vice, I think they actually summed up the cheap burger chain the best with this line. If McDonald's was friends, then Wimpy was only fools and horses. And that's fine by me.
Nighty-night.
Food, it's Weetabix. When she's choosy, it's not too sweet to Bix.
Who remembers? Weetabix. Of course you all remember Weetabix, it's still around. In fact, it's one of the UK's most popular breakfast cereals even to this day. However, after looking it up, I was actually surprised to see that Weetabix is also available in the Americas too. Who would have thought, right? Even more surprising is that Weetabix didn't even start its life in the UK, but instead Australia, where it was known as simply Weet-Bix. Created over 100 years ago in 1919, the cereal became so popular that it ended up getting bought out by the Sanitarium Health Food Company, resulting in the original designer jumping ship to South Africa, creating Weet-Bix again, but this time adding a big fat A in the centre because, well, you know, he didn't want to get sued, did he? And with that, the Weetabix cereal boomed in popularity all over the world, except for Australia and New Zealand, obviously. However, it was during the 80s when the cereal, like so many others, finally got its own mascot.
I see titty breakfast.
We'd better tell them.
We're not airy-fairy cereals, all right? Because we're the Weetabix.
We've got a bit of bite.
We're the Weetabix.
Yeah!
If you want to feel like full.
What he's trying to say, you make it neat wheat, mate.
If you know what's good for you, you do.
Okay.
We're the Weetabix. Okay?
That's true!
It's your neat wheat, mate. If you know what's good for you, the Weetabix.
As you can see, unlike other cereals that included overly agreeable tigers, stereotypical Irish leprechauns, or a rabbit that's serving up its own secret recipe, the Weetabix gang are a gang of skinheads that are seriously going to be f***ing you up unless you go and eat your Weetabix, you muggy cunt. Alright, don't be scared, this was 1982 and by this point skinheads had become so watered down that it was completely fine for a company to use them to market a cereal to children. It'll be fine, said the Weetabix company. You got your token female character, the nervous Nelly, and of course you got the front man who was a borderline bully, voiced by Bob Hoskins. Nope. Seriously.
If you want a filling cereal, the answer's written clear. It says Weetabix.
Yeah!
And if you're thinking to yourself that all of this is a massive recipe for disaster, you're wrong. The Weetabix gang was a huge success for the company and became so popular that the Weetabix Club was formed, and during the 80s, everything Neat Wheat became so well known that a whole heap of merchandise was shifted, which of course helped the sales of what is actually a pretty boring breakfast cereal. Unless of course you did weird stuff like this. Did anybody actually ever use Weetabix this way? And included in all that merch was of course a video game. Weetabix versus the Titches. costing about £2 upon release or several Weetabix tokens in return for the game. What you have here is essentially Space Invaders and not a lot else. Not exactly a unique computer game as the front cover so proudly claims. You simply control one of the Weetabix gang down at the bottom of the screen and you shoot up at the titchies at the top. You do this as quickly as you can, dodging enemy projectiles, otherwise it depletes the amount of time left needed to save the day, and then it loops. It's easy to criticise, especially if you didn't grow up here in the UK, but the important thing to remember about this is that it was a bloody £2 game. Whilst everybody else was spending £20 to £30 on Atari 2600 titles, you got to ask yourself, is this 10% of the fun? No, it's not. This is perfectly fine for £2. Regardless, unlike the breakfast cereal, I would actually say that this isn't the best way to start your day off. Although it's gotta be better than waking up with this above your head every single morning, right?
The bed head can be easily fitted to a single bed, and you can choose from dog picture tier or big screen, not the pied.
Alright.
Hey guys, just before we get into that last segment and before I open this bad boy up, please do, if you like this sort of content and you want more people to be able to see it and you want me to make more content like this, then please do hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, leave a comment, all that sort of stuff. Those sort of things really do help the algorithm on YouTube push it out further, and hopefully more people will be able to see it. So if you want to see more content like this, then please do those things. Thank you guys. Let's get into that final segment.
Here of meat and potatoes, or how you think of soup and a sandwich, then you have the taste for Knorr.
Who remembers Knorr? Don't look at me like that. You guys want obscure tying games, and obscure tying games you're going to be getting on this channel. Hey, if you want Cool Spot, that Kool-Aid man, those Californian blue ball bag things, go somewhere else, because right here you're going to be seeing the proper obscure stuff that you're not going to see anywhere else. So this is the complete history of Knorr, where we're going to look into the company's history. We're going to look into the mascot of that company and the tie-in game. And guys, just a little word of warning for you. This one is definitely nightmare inducing. Knorr, also known as Royco in some parts of the world, started its life in Germany in 1838. Originally, they produced coffee substitutes made from drying fruits and grounding almonds and what have you. However, as time moved on towards the end of the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century, the company began to experiment further by releasing several flavors of soup. They would eventually include your typical tin soups, but before this, it was dried soup, dehydrated soup, or even pocket soups as they were known back then, which were essentially dehydrated meat and veg, quickly becoming popular among sailors before jumping ship, no pun intended, into households, gaining extreme traction, especially when the reintroduction of bouillon cubes, aka stock or broth cubes, became the norm, becoming a staple being sold to this very day, with Knorr arguably being the leader of the pack in both of these fields. But even though the company is now a household name, they of course, like every other company, had their ups and they had their downs as they experimented with new ideas throughout the years. However, it was during the 1940s that this company saw a huge rise in profits, thanks in no small part due to the company's brand new mascot. And guys, brace yourself for this one. Knorri. Not scared yet? You wait until we get to the game. So apparently in Switzerland, where the mascot was used the most, the idea was of course to give the brand a face. A big old round face, which was no accident as that's the same shape as a bowl, which you put soup in, obviously. As well as appearing on some rather brilliant retro posters and mini comics in newspapers, he would also appear in theatres that at the time would allow for free entry to adults who unlikely had wireless radios, let alone TV sets for the time themselves, in exchange for companies like Knorr and many others paying the theatres to advertise their products on the big screen, in between all of your typical Laurel and Hardy films, news reports and mini documentaries. And even though the character has for the most part been faded out from the majority of of the worldwide market, he is still to this day being celebrated as sort of a national figure for Switzerland, a sign of families coming together and enjoying mealtimes from one of the country's most well-recognised food distributors. And in 1992, in Germany, a country where it was very well known that you would be getting free games on floppy disks that were basically advertisements, old Knorri got his very first point-and-click adventure game. Seriously, brace yourself. Oh yeah, that one got ya. So you play as the world's creepiest mascot, who somehow actually gets creepier when you play the game. Of course, this is impossible to play these days unless you can actually speak the native tongue, but creepiness aside, it is still rather well made, we can at least decipher that. The story in a nutshell is that you need to save the town from a curse that's put on by a dark underworld. You do this by finding some magic dead tuna fish that has had the recipe made inside of its belly. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I'm translating this right. Regardless, these all are things that are at least talked about in this pretty standard for the time point and click adventure game. You know, you pick things up, you try and add them to random things within the real world, you even open up your inventory and try and push them together. It's all pretty standard stuff for point and click adventure games. Like for instance, you have to give the parrot some sugar. He then gives you a code that you then need to use later on in the game. It's so obscure, and I'm sure it makes way more sense if you actually fully understand it, but alas, I don't. So after watching a playthrough of the game, I discovered that it's surprisingly pretty short, with 12 full detailed screens, including one where you send Knorri to hell, where he belongs or where he came from, one of the two. Regardless, it is probably the best soup game I've actually ever played, although Soup Pot is still not out yet, guys. Don't forget to wishlist it. Hey there guys, DJ Slope here from Slope's Game Room. Thank you all so much for checking out this video. Like I said earlier on in the video, if you like it, please do hit subscribe. Please do hit that bell. Please give it a thumbs up, a comment, all those sort of things help out with the algorithm. Honestly, no one knows exactly how it works, but it definitely helps. It spreads the love and more people get to see it. So thank you all so much. This is the part of the video where I'd like to give a massive shout out to all of the Patreons and YouTube members. And whilst I do so, I'll be showing you off what I got inside that Haribo bag. Now, let's give a massive shout out to all of the following Patreons and YouTube members. With an extra big shout out going to Aaron Gorman, Akatimo84, Andrew Dalton, Arista, Benjamin Guy, Big Rico, Boots and Pup, Bram Perez, Chev Matic, Chris the Shapeshifter, Christopher DeVero, Clan Bob, Conrad Constantine, To Action Saxon, Dina81, Game Apologist, Gary Pinkett, Ian Quell, Intrigues Gaming, Akateacher, The Ashen Knight, Jay is Manchild, Jabba Al Aiden, James, Jeff Mianowski, Jeremy Bauer, Jeremy Rodriguez, Kinglink Reviews, King of Carrot Flower, Lucas Softail, Man Shovel, Matt Jackson, Michael Ridley Dash, Mike Fallon, Mind of the Unsane, Nicholas Burtner, Nick Pollard, Over Giles Zane, Rolvo EP, Retro to Next Gen aka Lou, Richard Alderjic, Rovan Army, Sir Nilsson, Shade Silent, Shadow Dragon, Solix Captor, Taylor Rainwater, That Gamer, The Cunning Linguist, The Sneaky Ferret, Tim Lund, Todd Paul Float G, Vitus Varnes, Vike Echo, Wobbles and Bean the Wonder Ducks, and Ye Old Hamburglar. Hope you like what was in the bag, guys, and everyone I just said there, all of the other names you see at the bottom of the screen as well, all of these people help make this video, help make these videos what they are. Thank you all so much. But guys, until next time, this is DJ Soap signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Much love everyone, bye bye.